we are going to move on to the final one of today. And the theme here is around employee engagement. Employee engagement remains a difficult thing to tackle for a lot of organizations. In their quest for higher engagement levels and for lack of a better alternative perhaps, many of them turn to the infamous annual employee engagement survey. And while the intention of conducting such a survey is good, gauging people on their satisfaction and happiness with their job and the workplace, the difficulty seems to lie in both the execution of the survey and the follow-up. And by that I mean undertaking lasting action based on the results of the engagement survey. Anonymity, or the lack thereof, also plays a role. One research conducted by the American Educational Research Association found that 75% of participants are more inclined to complete a survey truthfully if they are assured of the anonymity of the responses. But even when, so to speak, anonymous, some employees believe that their responses could still be tracked back to them, hence influencing their answers. On the one hand, though, when done well, employee surveys can have tremendous benefits for the organization. From increased productivity and engagement to improved retention and recruitment and a stronger culture. The question is, though, how many organizations actually know how to do their engagement surveys well? And how many companies don't reap any benefits of the surveys they conduct due to a poor execution, a non-existent follow-up, and a fear of retaliation? And this, my dear Barry and Laura, brings me to our final statement of the day. Employee engagement surveys are inherently flawed and do more harm than good. All right, Laura, I will start with you again this time. What do you vote?
I vote no.
All right, Barry, what do you vote?
Big strong yes. Yes. Inherently flawed, do more harm.
A triple yes. All right, Laura, I'm going to go back to you. Please elaborate.
They can be done really badly. If you're doing it yearly, that's just awful. But you can have something that sets up, you can literally ask them 2-3 questions, just as a temperature pulse on a Friday, for example, or on a Monday, just to gauge where they're at in certain areas and to gauge, how happy they are with their leaders, things like that, and different questions you can ask them. And there's some fantastic tools for it. I actually, the last project I was working on, we had a pulse tool that went out every Friday, and where I saw the flaws, pros and cons, I guess, were that if people are in too smaller teams, they won't go on there because they feel that people they'll think it goes back to them. So there is this real trust issue. You need to make sure they're grouped out in much larger teams. If you have like a customer success team that's like 3 people and a sales team that's 3, put them together. And you need to also help people to, when they're giving the feedback, if they don't want it to be obvious, obviously they don't say, oh, in support, blah, blah. So it's helping them, I suppose, to create more of an anonymous way of giving feedback. And I think you really want to prove then to them. So the leaders as well, was another challenging area. So you could just group them together, but it's proving them that you action it, because that was another challenge I saw, was people were like, what's the point? We had like 40% of people were taking part, and most of them were new starters and things, and obviously saying it was wonderful. But I suppose that the challenge was that people would fall off because they didn't feel it was anonymous. But the main other area was that they didn't feel we were actioning it. And that's where we needed to have those really honest conversations, actually sometimes even share the screen with some of the feedback and be like, okay, we've messed up there. Discuss it as a leadership team. I would discuss it with the leadership teams, heading up the people function, and be like, these are areas, these are common themes. This is where we need to make changes. Then we'd have a company-wide meeting once every quarter. We'd actually share the changes and share where we've made mistakes, share where the learning is, and really create that environment for psychological safety. I guess my final point on it is that if you have an environment of psychological safety, if your company and your ideas tend to be employee-led, so that's sort of things like blue sky thinking sessions, letting employees run meetings rather than just the CEO, then and welcoming feedback from every level in the business to get rid of the hierarchy rubbish, then you won't necessarily need to rely on engagement scores, but they are useful to have alongside, because not everybody always feels confident to share. But you really, really want to create an environment where everyone feels they can have a voice, and they can have that either physically in a meeting or they can use a platform. So that's my point of view on it.
Thank you. All right, Barry. Yes, and yes, I believe you said.
Yeah, look, Laura was starting to converge towards the end of her answer there, which was good. look, two
It
things
wasn't conversing, Barry. It's a hybrid approach.
Okay.
Different people from different backgrounds.
Could be. Look, two things in our belief system that, quite frankly, we need to get out there and recognize before we start organizing together for work. They are that both the market and people are utterly unpredictable. Yeah, we just can't. So we've seen that in the last couple of years. I did a big planning exercise in January. COVID kicked us all out across the world in February. And I also worked for a tech firm based in Kiev that a week before we did an annual planning that completely and utterly, went to nowhere for all the obvious horrific reasons. People being resorted back to the comfort of leaders, which is what our engagement surveys too often go for, of giving you an ENPS score, a sort of a finite figure that we can judge probably other parts of the broken system, like reward, like performance. I've spent far too many meetings getting people to just explain the movement between 4.1 and 4.3 in a local team based on what, as a progression that allows them quite simply and utterly to get rewarded as part of their own individual pay package by gaming the living daylights out of it. The engagement surveys themselves too often are steered, biased. Yeah, the subject matter, frankly, is preordained. The sorts of questions we go search typically are the ones that are directed downwards and viewed as being the sorts of things that in the boardroom are important to be tackled. I think that's anti-democratic. I don't think for a second that's how the complexity of individuals who bounce in the morning motivated, hit a particular issue and leave in tears. Our complexity over a day, the way that we work, the chrono working that is now emerging around I'm crap in the morning, but quite simply will still be on the keyboard at 11:30 at night because that's the way my body clock seems to go. And there's a school of thought around how we actually factor those in. But I think the flawed element of it is that it's a blunt instrument, regardless of, annual just is daft, it's laughable in a world of complexity. So the market side of things I've mentioned, but even lesser so, that constricting, we will now come forth and ask for your opinion is once again, parent, child, I want to check in you're okay. Give individuals, talented individuals, as least friction as possible in dictating how work gets done and how they do that and what they bring to it. We have brilliant alternative examples from many years ago, not even young and trendy, but the Toyotas of the world. That ability many years ago to stop the assembly line, to give very tangible feedback that says, I am but a mere cog in this particular assembly line, but the whole production plant stops and I'm on the flip chart showing you a better way of doing things, has been going on in Toyota for decades upon decades. The bit Laura's also rightfully pointed out, that ability to have other people, talk to the sentiment and get involved and, and sort of create solutions. So I'm a big fan of principles over rules. Yeah. So if we've got a principle about decision making at the periphery, at the market, at what needs to be done, then, like the wonderful stories of Southwest Airlines, give people the empowerment to spend a budget to keep a passenger happy. Yeah, the trade-offs that take place. So, surveys for me are a blunt instrument of where we have oversteered to the leadership, the hierarchy, the bureaucracy of the business that needs to report out some slightly odd numbers. And as I say, ENPS has now gone overdrive, and we then go and react on that. Whereas if we were to embrace the fact that these are complex, unpredictable people who you should stop controlling, who you should stop treating like children and allow them to flourish in creating value for your organization, we will all be in a much better place. So engagement surveys, get in the bin.
Thank you, Barry. Laura.
So I agree with obviously not treating our employees like children and very much having employee-led businesses. And you wouldn't think I was pro surveys, because you just wouldn't think it if you knew me. But I do feel they're a part of a multi-pronged approach, and I think they can be completely adjusted to be right for each business. Something I really liked about the Pulse engagement surveys is it's literally asking 2 or 3 questions per week. It wasn't mandatory to take place, to take part. People could take part if they felt they wanted to. So it wasn't like, oh, Darren, you didn't do your Pulse survey and you need to. It was very much, if you want to, and we will listen. And we actually we wanted people to tell us where we were going wrong rather than where we were going right. We didn't want this sort of bum kissing approach. It was more like, where are we going wrong? That's what I want to hear. I want the bad feedback so I can see, how can we make things better? But not everybody's going to want to fill in a form. Not everyone's going to want to speak to their manager in a one-to-one because they might not feel safe to do so, or might feel uncomfortable, might feel it ruins their relationship or whatever. Not everyone is going to want to share their opinion in a blue sky thinking group. So I think it's having that multi-pronged approach, and then you can have more of a quarterly questionnaire that goes out if you wanted, that's more around culture or diversity. There's some really interesting topics, benefits that you can ask people about, but it's creating some different platforms that people can give their feedback. But then what you need to do, because you can set up a culture of trust and you can get people doing that, but they'll very quickly stop if you don't action it. And so you need to show you're listening, you need to show that you're actioning it, and you need to have an environment where it's like egoless leadership. Leaders who are like, yeah, messed up there, so sorry, rather than not wanting to hear any bad feedback. You want leaders who are welcoming bad feedback so they can only get better. So it's sort of creating this innovative growth mindset culture that's got real psychological safety, where everyone can give feedback, everyone can innovate, everyone can share ideas. That's the absolute dream that we want. But yeah, I think it's part of a multi-pronged approach.
All right, Barry, I'm going to go back to you one last time, and then I'm going to just wrap up. If you have anything to add.
I always have things to add. Yeah, I always have things to add. Yeah, look, I think taking on the theme Laura has mentioned, and I think this throws up a break in the other parts of the system, is this thing I would call in terms of mastery and knowledge, and equipping ourselves with an understanding of what is incredibly important within the business. And so what do I mean by that? A data point that gets us incredibly distracted because a group of individuals want to introduce an incredibly expensive brand new thing of doing, a brand new benefit, a brand new way of working, or an investment, when you haven't created enough understanding elsewhere in the organization about the sorts of things that's important to keep that enterprise going. Yeah. So the idea that they truly understand that there is clearly profitability above all else, or we don't get the luxury to gather and do these things, and the profitability allows us to drive this. So one of the dangers I see HR teams get themselves into constantly is a very open, virtuous, doing all the right stuff, but the feedback coming back is about being handled in meetings that is just quite simply, incapable of being delivered. Yeah, it's just not where they are. And so there's a tension created if elsewhere in the system we haven't actually created a sense of, do the people posing solutions have enough knowledge about what needs to be done or what's important, or are we getting ourselves back into distracted conversations here that takes us away from creating, value for the organization? The other danger, last point for me on it, is that it overemphasizes data points and doesn't take us into what I call that evidence-based piece. So a very climate-based, we don't feel good because we've had a bad quarter, this is sentiment, this is where we are, this is what we need, or what are the other core bits of data, evidence, external, analytics that tells us we are actually at a root cause issue. Or actually what we're doing here is we're dealing with symptoms constantly without going back to maybe, once again, this is about a whole bad sense of managers in there, or, issues that are just not being unearthed because we're all in the symptom space, in and around it. And so I see lots of distraction based on surveys where the allure especially when they're short and sharp, is about fixing the symptom, the noise, and not the signal, to the detriment of the evidence based on trends and further root cause analysis that's required that takes time.
All right. Thank you both for this third and final debate. Once again, I think what is fantastic about this is that we had two different perspectives. One thing that I gather from this that we do all agree on is that an annual employee engagement survey definitely does not make any sense. That is what we for sure agree on. Yes, and then I'm very thankful for these different perspectives, and I'm sure that people listening or watching will be as well, because it really gives a very good overview of all the different elements to take into account. And I think one thing that we could also take away from this is that it's maybe worth it as well to consider different ways of gauging employees apart from the survey. And I really liked personally the example of Toyota and these, I was actually imagining how they just like stop the whole production because somebody wants to try something out. That's not to say that that works, of course, for every single business or organization, but it does show, and this is indeed an old example, but it does show that there's other ways as well, which I think is always good, that we have some alternatives that we can choose from. So these are my final words. A big, big, big thank you from me to both of you for joining me today.
It was great to see you, Neely, and thanks so much. Sorry. Thanks so much for having me on today. So yeah, thank you very much.
And likewise, thank you, Neely, and yeah, look, an absolute pleasure, Laura. It's been terrific. I hope everyone gets what they need from it, but I've really enjoyed it. Learned loads from you.
Yeah, me too. Definitely very different backgrounds, different perspectives. So it was really, really interesting. And hopefully we've both got stuff in there that's going to help people. Hopefully that's the main, main outcome here.
Let's hope so.
I do not have a single doubt about that. All right. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in to today's episode of HR Debatable. If you want to share this episode with colleagues, friends, family, even if you like, please go ahead, spread the word, and then I will see you very soon again for a new episode of HR Debatable. Thank you and goodbye.